I was 22 the first time a Veshari laughed at my watch, and 61 the last, and in between I carried more frightened things across the hush than I can count without the watch to count them on. People who have never made the crossing think the hush is a distance. It is not a distance. A distance you can cross by aiming at it. The hush is a wide dead band of nothing, 3 days deep at the narrow part and 9 at the broad, where the stars go out and stay out, and where every machine a thinking creature has ever built to tell it where it is and how fast it is going lies down quietly and dies. Not breaks, dies. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole of my trade. A broken thing can be mended in the dark. A dead thing only comes back when the light does. The hauler was called the Lomarsh, and she was old the way I was old, which is to say still working and not pretty about it. Flat-bellied, slab-sided, built to hold a great many bodies in a great deal of fear, and set them down again on a far shore with their fear spent and their bodies whole. She had been my father's before the hush took him, not the hush itself, but the long quiet wearing of a man who has spent his life inside it, and she would be nobody's after me, because the trade was ending and I knew it, and that is part of this story too. The morning of the last run, the star we were leaving poured straight down the open mouth of the embarkation deck, and turned the whole length of her hold to gold. I want you to hold that picture, because you will need it later when there is no light at all. Bright morning, dust hanging in the slanted shafts of it, the smell of warm metal and packed people and the cold mineral breath off the loading ramps. A child somewhere crying the way children cry when they have cried so long they have forgotten the original cause. And me at the head of the ramp with the manifest board in my hands, counting them aboard, because counting is the only thing I have ever truly been good at. They came up the ramp in the way the desperate always come, too much luggage or none at all, and nothing in between. 6 different peoples on that run, fleeing 6 different ruins, and I will not pretend I knew the politics of any of them. I knew the weight of them. I knew the shape they made on my ramp. The tall, pale ones who folded themselves double to fit the doorways. The low, broad ones who moved in family knots and would not be parted even to be counted. The ones with the long, sad faces who carried their old people on their backs because the old people would not be left, and the young ones who carried nothing because they had already left everything. I counted them. 490, on a hull rated for 400, and I took everyone, because a hull rating is a number a man in an office invented, and the people on my ramp were not a number anybody invented. The Veshari came aboard last, and they came aboard wrong. You have to understand what the Veshari are to understand the wrongness of it. They are a people who do not, in any sense I have ever been able to feel from the inside, see. They sense. Everything about them is instrument. Their eyes are poor and their ears are poorer, and over a long climb up out of their own dark beginnings, they replaced what they lacked with machines, until the machine and the seeing became the same act, until a Veshari standing in a room does not look at the room. The room reports itself to the Veshari through 100 quiet sensors threaded into the bone behind their faces. They are very good at this. They are, I will say it plainly, far better at knowing where they are than I will ever be, on every shore in the bright universe where the instruments work. The hush is the one shore where they do not work. Their survey captain came up my ramp like a man walking into a room he has already memorized from the blueprints, and his name, which I learned later than I should have, was Vale Calden. He was a head taller than me and built like a folded instrument himself, all dark gray planes and fine seams, and the sensor cowl around his skull threw off a low blue readout glow even in that flood of gold morning light. He stopped at the head of my ramp and turned his blind, clever head toward me and toward the watch, because the watch was already in my hand. It is always in my hand. It has been in my hand so long there is a paleness on the heel of my palm where it sits. "You are the pilot," he said. The voice came out of a grill at his throat, flat and exact, translated. "The instruments report you as the pilot. I confess I do not understand the report." "That happens," I said. "Mind the lip of the ramp." He did not mind the lip of the ramp. His sensors had told him where it was, and so he did not feel he needed to attend to it, and the lip of the ramp caught his foot, and a Veshari survey captain stumbled half a step in front of 490 frightened refugees, and I watched the small cold fury of it go through him like a current. He recovered. He looked sensed down at the thing in my hand. "What is the device?" he said. "A watch," I said. "It is mechanical." "It is." "It has no link. It reports to nothing. It is sealed brass and a spring." He said spring the way another creature might say bone or worm, something low, something from before. "You carry a sealed brass spring through the hush." "I carry 490 people through the hush," I said. "The watch is how I do it." I have had this conversation, or one very near it, perhaps 1,000 times, and it always goes the same way, and it always ends the same way, 3 days later on the far side. So I have learned not to argue it on the near side. I have learned to let the dark do the arguing. But Calden was the first one in a long time who would not let it lie, and that, more than his contempt, is why I remember him. "Pilot," he said, "I have crossed 940 surveyed transits. I hold the second highest navigational rating in the Veshari fleet. I am aboard this vessel because the surveyed transit was lost, and the only remaining passage to the relief shore is through this." And his cowl swung toward the great closed forward ports, toward the dark beyond them, and his voice did not change, but the glow off his cowl flickered, a flicker I would learn to read before the run was out, through this. "And I am told the passage is held by a creature with a sealed brass spring and a count. I want to understand the count before I trust my survivors to it." His survivors. There were perhaps 60 Veshari in that 490. I had counted them. "The count isn't a thing you trust," I said. "It's a thing I keep. You don't have to understand it, you have to be quiet during it. That's the whole of what I'll ask of you." "Explain the count." So I explained it, because he had asked plainly, and a plain question earns a plain answer even from a tired man. I told him the hush kills the instruments. He knew that. Every spacefaring people knows that. It is why the surveyed transits exist, narrow charted threads where the dead band thins enough that a fast ship can blind jump the gap before its systems fully fail. I told him the surveyed transit he'd been counting on had drifted or collapsed, the way they do, because the hush is not a fixed thing, it breathes. I told him that left the broad crossing, the old crossing, the one no instrument ship can make because the broad crossing is 3 days deep in true dead dark, and no blind jump in creation can hold a course for 3 days with everything aboard lying dead. "And you can," he said. "I can hold a course for 3 days," I said, "by hand, by count. The watch keeps the time the hush takes away. I keep the heading the time gives me. 41 beats and a quarter turn to starboard, 110 beats and we hold, 200 and we correct for the long drift that always pulls a hull leftward in the middle deep. I don't know why it pulls leftward, my father didn't know, his master didn't know, but it pulls leftward, and so 200 beats and we correct. It is not sensing. It is not seeing. It is counting and turning when the count says turn, and trusting the count when everything in you and everything aboard is screaming that the count is wrong. That last part is the trade. The counting any fool can learn. The trusting takes 30 years. He was quiet for a moment. The readout glow off his cowl had gone very steady, which I would later understand meant he was working hard. "It is superstition," he said finally. "You have dressed superstition in the clothing of a method. There is no information in a spring. A spring cannot know where the relief shore is." "The spring doesn't know where the shore is," I said. "I do. The spring only tells me how long I've been wrong." I do not think he heard that. I have said it to a great many of his kind, and I do not think any of them have ever heard it, not on the near side. It is not a thing you can hear in the light. We sealed the low marsh at the top of the bright morning. I stood my pilot's watch in the high forward pilot house with the gold light still pouring in the ports, and the whole packed weight of those 490 souls under my feet, and I wound the watch. You wind it 40 turns. Not 39 and not 41. 40 turns puts a known tension in a known spring, and a known spring runs a known span, and the whole crossing is built on the known, which is the only thing the hush will let you keep. I wound it 40 turns, and I felt the small ratcheting bite of it under my thumb. That sound I have heard 10,000 times. That sound that is the sound of my whole life. And I set the low marsh on her departure heading, and took her down off the bright shore and out toward the dark. Calden had asked to stand in the pilot house. I let him. I should not have, and I would pay for it in the deep, but I let him, because a captain who has lost his transit and put his survivors in a stranger's hands deserves to watch the stranger's hands, and because, if I am honest, some tired, vain part of me wanted the witness. We do not get many witnesses, we crossing pilots. We do our work where there is no light to see it by. The stars went out the way they always go out, not all at once, from the edges in. You watch the far field of them dim and curdle, and the dark come walking up out of the corners of the ports, and one by one the bright familiar points you have steered by all your life simply are not there any more, until the last of them, the home star astern, narrows to a single hard gold thread, and then to a point, and then to nothing, and you are inside the hush, and the universe has closed its hand. The instruments began to die at the edge, the way they always do. The long-range first, Calden made a small sound when his long-range link folded, a sound I do not think he knew he made. Then the registry, the great living catalogue the Veshari carry of every ship and shore and soul in the surveyed sky, the thing that tells them not only where they are but who they are in relation to everything else. I watched that go out of him. I have never been a Veshari, and I will not pretend to know what it is to lose the registry, but I have watched 100 of them lose it, and I will tell you it is like watching a man lose his name. The cowl glow stutters. The fine gray planes of the face go slack in a way you would not think planes could. They reach for the thing that is gone, over and over, a phantom reaching, and it is not there, and it is not there, and it is not there. The registry is non-responsive, Calden said. His flat, exact voice had a crack in the flatness now, a hairline. Pilot, the registry is non-responsive. I know, I said, 41 beats. My positional certainty is degrading. I have a pilot, I have a positional certainty of. You don't have a positional certainty, I said, gently, because by then I had stopped wanting the witness and started wanting only to get him through. Nobody in here has a positional certainty. There's no position in here to be certain of. There's only the count. I held the watch where the small green numerals of its face, luminous paint, an old human trick, a paint that glows for hours off a single minute under a lamp and asks nothing of any link or power where they could see it, glowing faint and steady in the dark that was now total. 41 beats and a quarter turn to starboard. I've taken the turn. We're on the broad crossing. Everything is exactly where it should be. You cannot know that. I can't see it, I said. I know it. He did not understand the difference. It is the difference between his whole people and mine. The Veshari know what they can sense, and when they cannot sense, they cannot know, and so in the hush they do not merely lose their way. They lose the possibility of their way. The floor falls out from under the very idea of knowing, and a creature for whom knowing has always been the same as sensing is left standing over a hole with no name for what's on the other side of it. I have watched strong Veshari, captains, scholars, soldiers, simply stop in the deep dark, stop and stand and make the small phantom reaching motion at a registry that is not there, for hours. They do not panic the way my people panic with noise. They go still. They go terribly, terribly still, and the stillness is worse than any screaming, and I have learned to count louder when I feel it coming on, because the count is a sound. And a sound is a thing to hold in the dark. And sometimes a Veshari will hold to the sound of my counting the way a drowning man holds a rope, even while the front of his mind is telling him the rope is superstition. The first day in the deep is the easy day. I say easy. I mean only that nothing has yet gone wrong and the count is fresh, and the body has not yet begun the long argument with the count that is the true substance of the crossing. I stood my watch. I wound the brass at the turn of each span, 40 turns. the small ratchet bite under my thumb the only event in a universe of nothing. I took my heading changes when the count called them, 41 and the quarter turn, 110 and the hold, 200 and the long correction for the leftward pull. And between them I counted, under my breath, the old count my father taught me in a voice I can still hear, though I cannot any longer remember his face without a likeness to look at. And I will not tell you the count itself, not the true cadence of it, because that is the one thing in this trade that is not mine to give away. It goes from master to pilot and nowhere else, and there are 4 of us left who hold it now, and when we are gone the broad crossing closes, and the hush goes back to being a wall, and that is a sorrow for another telling. It was deep in the first night, by the watch, that Calden spoke again, and this time the crack in his voice had opened into something I had not heard from a Veshari before. "Pilot, I have run the figures." "You don't have figures," I said. "Sleep if your people sleep. There's nothing for you to do for 2 days." "I have run the figures internally," he said, and there was a terrible pride in it, a man insisting on the one tool he has left. "From the departure vector and the elapsed interval and the standard drift models of the broadband, and the figures do not agree with your count. By my reckoning we are 11 degrees to starboard of any survivable heading. We are driving into the deep band. If we continue on your count we will be lost in the middle dark with no power to turn back. Pilot. The figures do not agree with the count. And here is the thing I most need you to understand, the thing that is the marrow of my whole trade, and I will say it as plainly as I have ever said anything. He was not lying. He was not even wrong by his own lights. His internal figures, run off the standard drift models, off the surveyed transit mathematics his whole people had built across 10,000 years, genuinely said we were 11 degrees off and driving to our deaths. And his figures were exactly as good as the models they were built on, and the models were built for the surveyed transits, the narrow charted threads, and the surveyed transits assume a hush that holds still, and the broad crossing does not go through the part of the hush that holds still. The broad crossing goes through the part that breathes. The leftward pull in the middle deep that I correct for at 200 beats, the pull my father couldn't explain and his master couldn't explain, that pull is the hush breathing, and no drift model in the Veshari registry has it, because no Veshari ship has ever survived the middle deep to measure it, because every Veshari ship that has ever tried has done exactly what Calden was now begging me to do. Trusted the figures. Corrected the 11 degrees. Turned to starboard to get back onto the heading the model said was survivable. And driven straight into the breathing dark. "Don't touch the helm," I said. "Pilot, I heard your figures. Your figures are good figures for a place we are not. We are 11 degrees to starboard of the heading your models call survivable, because the heading your models call survivable is built for the narrow transit and we are on the broad crossing and the broad crossing pulls left. And so I aim right, 11 degrees right, and the pull brings us home. If I corrected to your figures I'd be aiming straight and the pull would take us left into the deep band and we'd die there with our figures perfect. Don't touch the helm." A silence. In the dark, the faint green glow of the watch face and the fainter blue stutter of his cowl. And 490 souls breathing under our feet. "You are asking me," Calden said slowly, "to disregard the only instrument I have left." "Yes," I said. "On the strength of a count, a cadence, a thing you will not even speak aloud." "Yes." "And if you are wrong, then we die exactly as fast as we'd die if you were right and I listened to you," I said. "The difference is I won't be wrong. I've made this crossing 206 times. The pull is real. The count holds. Sit down, Captain, please. I am asking you as one tired man to another. Sit down and let me count." He did not sit down. I want to be fair to him, even now. A Veshari survey captain who has lost his registry in the deep dark and then been told to throw away his last figures on the word of a creature with a brass spring. I do not think there is a version of Vale Calden in any branching universe that sits down quietly the first time he is asked. His whole self was built on the instruments, and I was asking him to set his whole self aside and trust mine, and the only proof I could offer him was 3 days away in the light he could not yet imagine ever seeing again. So no, he did not sit down. Deep in the second day, when the count was at its hardest and my own body had begun the long argument, and it does, even mine, even after 200 crossings, the body in the deep dark begins to insist the count is slow. The count is fast. The count has slipped. You have lost it. You have killed them all, and you don't even know. Deep in that second day, when I was holding the cadence with everything I had and had nothing left over to watch him with, Vale Calden went for the helm. I felt him move before I understood it. A great gray shape coming up out of the dark of the pilot house, fast, the way they can move when the instruments are gone, and they are running on the old buried animal under all that machinery. And his hands, they have good hands. The Veshari, fine and many-fingered. His hands closed on the manual yoke beside mine and began to haul it to starboard, to correct the 11 degrees, to put us on the heading his dead figure swore was survivable, to turn the Lomarsh and every soul in her straight into the breathing deep. And I did not fight him for the yoke. That is the part the people who tell this story wrong always get wrong. They think there was a struggle, 2 men wrestling for the helm over a chasm of dark. There was not. I am 61 and he was strong and frightened, and there was no winning a wrestle. What I did instead was the only thing my whole trade had ever taught me to do, the thing under the counting, the thing the counting is only the surface of. I kept the count. I did not look at his hands. I did not look at the yoke moving under his strength. I looked at the green glow of the watch face, and I kept my voice level and low, and I kept counting out loud now, loud as I could make it in that dead room, the count he could not understand and would never be given, and I said between the beats in the same level voice, "You can turn the yoke, Captain. The yoke isn't the heading. The heading's in the count. Turn the yoke all you like. When you're done, I'll bring her back to the count, because the count is where the people are. Turn it. I'll wait." And he turned it. He hauled the Lomarsh 11 degrees to starboard, onto his perfect dead figures, and I felt the great hull come around under us, sluggish and blind, and I did not stop counting. And somewhere under our feet 490 souls felt the turn and did not know it was the wrong turn. And the dark did not change, because the dark never changes. That is the horror of it. You cannot see that you have turned to your death. The death looks exactly like the safety. It is all the same nothing. And at the bottom of his strength, at the very end of the turn, with the yoke hard over and the figures satisfied, and the Lomarsh pointed straight into the place that kills, Vale Calden stopped. I have thought about why he stopped for 30 years, and I am not certain I have it even now. I think it was this. I think a creature whose whole life is knowing, brought to a place where knowing is impossible, will reach in the end for the only knowing left in the room, and the only knowing left in that room was me. Not my figures, not my watch. Me, counting, level and unbroken while he did his worst. I think he had spent his whole frightened second day waiting for me to break, to argue, to grab the yoke back, to give him the fight that would have proven I was as lost as he was. And I did not break. I just kept counting through his hands on the helm, because the count was the people and the people were not his to lose, and somewhere in that, I think, somewhere in the simple fact of a creature who did not break, he found the one thing his instruments had never been able to give him, which was a reason to set the instruments down. He let go of the yoke. "Bring her back," he said. His voice had no flatness left in it at all. "Pilot, bring her back to your count. I cannot know. I am asking you to know for me." I brought her back. 11 degrees to port, back off his dead figures, back onto the count, back onto the breathing crossing, and I have never in 206 runs been so glad of the small ratchet bite of 40 turns as I was when I wound her at the next span with my hands shaking, because the body's long argument had nearly won that night, and a witness fighting me for the helm was very nearly the thing that tipped it, and we had come, by a count I will not speak aloud. that close to all dying together, with the captain's figures perfect on his lips. The deep middle, when we reached it, was very quiet. It always is. There is a place at the bottom of the broad crossing where even the body stops arguing, where the dark is so complete and so old that the mind simply gives up its insistence that anything ought to be otherwise, and a great peace comes that is not peace at all but the near cousin of dying. And that is the most dangerous place of all, more dangerous than Calden's hands on the yoke, because in that place a pilot can let the count go soft, can let it drift, can be lulled by the great old quiet into believing the count no longer matters. My father lost a pilot he was training in that place. Not the ship, the pilot. The man came out the far side alive and never counted right again, because the deep middle had shown him the peace and he could not unsee it. I have stood in that place 206 times, and I have held the count through every one of them by the only trick that works, which is to make the count small. Not 3 days to the shore. Not 490 souls. Just the next beat. Just the next turn of the brass. Just the small ratchet bite under the thumb. The whole of the crossing narrowed down to the single next thing, and the single next thing again and again, until the single next things have added up, without your ever once looking at the sum, to a far shore. Calden stood beside me through the deep middle, and he was very still, but it was not the terrible empty stillness of a Veshari who has lost the registry. It was a different stillness. I think he was listening to the count. Not understanding it. He would never understand it. It is not a thing his people are built to understand. But listening to it the way you listen to a sea you cannot swim, with respect and a little awe, and the beginning of something that on a human face I would have called shame, and on his blind gray face I could only feel as a stillness gone soft at the edges. "Pilot," he said once in the deepest part of the dark, "when we are through, if we are through, I will write what I have." He paused, hunting the word through the translation grill. "I will write what I have seen. There is no instrument record of this crossing. There cannot be. So there must be a witness record. I will be the witness. I will write that the broad crossing is held by a count that cannot be sensed and cannot be linked and cannot be proven, and that I, Vale Calden, second navigational rating of the Veshari fleet, who could not hold a single beat of it, am alive because a creature with a sealed brass spring did not break when I tried to kill us all." "Don't write that last part," I said. "It is the truest part." "It's the part that makes me look better than I am," I said. "I didn't not break out of virtue, Captain. I didn't break because breaking wasn't one of the options I had left. 40 years ago there were options. Now there's just the count. Write that the crossing held. Leave me out of the middle of it." I wound the brass. 40 turns, the ratchet bite, 200 beats, long correction. Here's the leftward pull, feel it. And he did. That was the thing. Down in the deep middle, with every instrument dead and the registry a phantom and his perfect figures abandoned. Vale Calden felt the leftward pull of the breathing hush with the old buried animal sense under all his machinery. Felt it the way I feel it, in the body, in the small lean of the deck. And I heard him make a sound that was not flat and not exact and not translated. A sound from under the grill. A sound his own throat made. And it was the sound of a creature feeling something true, with a sense he had spent his whole life pretending he did not have. "It pulls left," he said. "It pulls left. Your models do not have it because no ship survives to measure it. That's the whole trade, Captain. The crossing is held by the people who came back, and the only thing they brought back is the count, and the count is the only place the pull is written. And the count cannot be copied into any registry because the moment you write it down as a figure it stops being a thing you keep and starts being a thing you check, and you cannot check the count in the hush. There's nothing to check it against. You can only keep it. That's why your people can't cross, not because you're not clever. You're cleverer than me by a mile. It's because the crossing can't be sensed. It can only be kept. And keeping is a thing you have to have practiced before the light goes out, because in here there's no learning it. In here there's only having already learned." He was quiet a long time after that, and then he said, very low, We are a people who have spent 10,000 years building better and better ways to sense, so that we would never again have to merely keep. And I did not answer that, because there was no answer to it that would not have been cruel, and a man does not need to be told he is in the country of his ancestors' great mistake. He knows it by the cold of the air. The far edge of the hush comes up the way the near edge went away, from the corners in, except in reverse, except as the most beautiful thing a living creature can see. You are deep in the count, narrow to the next beat and the next, 3 days into a dark so total you have forgotten dark was ever anything but the whole of the world, and then, at the very edge of the very corner of the forward port, there is a thread, a single hard point of gold, the first star. The far shore's home star, exactly where the Count said it would be, exactly where it has been every one of 206 times, and exactly where Vale Caldun's perfect figures swore it could not be. I did not say anything when it came up. I never do. I just kept counting because the edge is not the shore. The edge is the most dangerous shore water in the whole crossing, the place where a pilot's heart leaps and his count slips and he runs the last of his people onto the rocks of his own relief. I kept the count. The thread became a point. The point became a star. The dark curdled and thinned, and the field of them came back. All at once now, the far sky flooding in the ports, and I took the last heading change off the last beat and brought the low marsh up out of the broad crossing into the full blazing light of the relief shore's morning, the gold of it pouring down the length of her exactly as the gold of the home shore had poured down at the start, 3 days and a whole dark universe ago. And 490 souls under my feet felt the light come in through the hull the way you feel sun on a closed eyelid, and a sound went up from the holds that I have heard 206 times and will never, the gods willing, grow tired of. A sound that is not a cheer and is not a sob, but is the particular sound a great many frightened living things make when they understand, all at once in their bodies, that they are going to go on living. I wound the watch, 40 turns, the ratchet bite under my thumb in the light. Vale Caldun stood in the flood of the morning with his registry coming back to him, his instruments waking one by one, his whole sensed universe reassembling itself around him in the light, and I watched him not look at any of it. I watched him look sense, see, I no longer know the right word, and I do not think he did either by then at the watch in my hand. The sealed brass, the spring. The thing that reports to nothing and links to nothing, and carried 490 souls through the one dark where every clever thing his people ever built lay down and died. It was running the whole time, he said. It was running the whole time, I said. It did not stop. It did not degrade. Through the entire deep band, while everything I am went dark, it kept, and again the throat sound, the under the grill sound, the true one, it kept the count. It kept the time the hush took away, I said. I kept the count. The watch only ever told me how long I'd been wrong. Out here in the light, that's nothing. A watch is a small thing in the light. In there it's the only true thing left because it's the only thing that doesn't need to know where it is to keep being itself. That's the whole secret, Captain, if there is one. In the dark, the thing that survives is the thing that doesn't need to see itself to keep going. Your registry needs the whole sky to tell it who it is. My watch just needs the spring. I looked at the brass a moment, the pale, worn place on the heel of my palm where it had sat for 40 years. I used to think that made my watch the lesser thing. I don't anymore. I think it makes it the deeper one. He wrote his witness record. I know because I read it years later, after the trade had ended and the broad crossing had closed, and there were only 2 of us left who held the count, and then only 1. It was a strange document, dry and exact in the Veshari way, all degrees and intervals and dead figures. And then in the middle of it, in a single line that did not match the rest, a line a survey captain had no business putting in an official record and put there anyway. He wrote that there exists a kind of knowing that cannot be sensed and cannot be linked and cannot be proven, and that his people, in 10,000 years of learning to sense, had let it die in themselves the way the stars die in the hush, from the edges in, until they could no longer feel a thing pulling left in the dark, and that he had felt it once in the deep band, beside a human and a brass spring, and that he was the lesser for having had to be carried to it. He left me out of the middle of it the way I'd asked. He wrote a human, not Elia's row, a human. I have made my last crossing now. The trade is over. The surveyed transits hold steady again in this long calm the hush is keeping, and a steady transit needs no count and no keeper, and that is right. That is as it should be. A thing that ends because it is no longer needed is a clean ending. I do not cross any more, but I still wind the watch. 40 turns every morning in whatever light I happen to be standing in, the small ratchet bite under the thumb. People ask me why. An old man with no dark left to cross, still winding a brass spring by hand every morning of his life. I tell them what I told the captain in the flood of the far morning, with 490 living things singing under the deck. A watch is a small thing in the light, but I learned my whole trade in the dark, and in the dark the small kept thing is the only thing that holds, and I am not going to be the one who lets it stop now, just because, for the moment, there happens to be sun.